because that would have been funny. But here we go.
And now for something special. The unit is self-contained with its own saddler, farrier, wheelwright and so on. It's a rigorous training dished out who know all there is to know about horses, and it brings results.
We take you behind the scenes now to show just some of the interesting aspects of this training.
Welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine, the best podcast to create sounder horses from the ground up. Mike Stine is a registered journeyman farrier with an APF1 accreditation. On this week's episode, we're going to talk to Greg Coates, Farrier Extraordinaire. Also, what is involved with releasing pressure in the deep digital flexor tendon, and also how are rocker arms used to help horses.
Rocker shoes.
I'm sorry, rocker shoes. What did I say? Rocker arms? I'm thinking like a straight V8 or something like that. How rocker shoes are used to help horses, and tips on working with a one-sided horse. All this and much, much more will be discussed here on Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine. And over to my far right side is Mike Stine. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you, Travis?
I will tell you, I am hot. It is
yes, you
hot,
are.
hot today. It's supposed to be a high of 97 degrees. Now, my wife was out riding the horse this morning, and I think the temperature right now, it says 84, which isn't too bad for this early in the morning, but she was out there probably about 7 o'clock. So it was probably 6 or 7 degrees cooler than that. But I just want everyone to know out there, when it gets hot, a lot of people, can't work in the heat. Mike, I feel sorry for you because you're, underneath horses all day long. And in this heat, you said you got some trimming and stuff to do today.
Yes.
So you're going to be in the heat this afternoon in the peak of it. But I pulled up this article as far as understanding the heat stress on horses. So if you got a minute, sit back, relax, and I'm going to read this to you as far as what you might not know. Excuse me. The summer heat is quickly approaching. The increased temperature of humidity is not only making working outside uncomfortable for us, but it is also hard for major impact on our horses' health and performances. Negative responses to heat stress includes going off feed, distressed fertility, collaring due to decreased water content in the gut, and overall poor performance. As the figure below states, now for every podcast we do, we have a matching video. You can see me waving to Mike and Mike waving to me. You can see this heat index as far as what to look out for and where's extreme caution, danger, and extreme danger areas as well as I'm reading this article. The heat index, which a horse starts to experience heat stress, is similar to what humans might experience with heat stress as well. The table below is provided by the National Weather Service, shows mild heat stress beginning at a heat index of only 80 degrees. When the heat index between 80 and 90, mild caution should be used for exercising horses. Between 91 and 102, which is a day like today and tomorrow, I think it's supposed to be 101 tomorrow, extreme caution should be used. Between 103 and 124, heat stress may become dangerous, and above 124, well, just don't do anything at all. Just let the horse be horse. Now, that doesn't mean that the horse can't be out there in the pasture, because out there in the pasture is different than actually working on your horse. It's no different than you laying out in the hammock and me getting up underneath the car and working on an engine or something like that. The heat will affect you the same way it affects the horse. In addition to the extent of heat stress as determined by the heat index from the graph there, the duration of the heat stress can heighten the negative effects of a horse. This is a hypothesized and the minimum threshold of where animals begin to experience heat stress as a function of demands on the animal. For example, a competing barrel horse will experience heat stress at a lower heat index than a pasture horse will. That's what I was talking about, you laying in the hammock and me working on a car. This is because the only about a quarter of the energy used in the muscle goes towards contraction and movement. The other 3/4 of that energy is wasted heat that the horse must dissipate. So for more activity the horse is in, more heat must be dissipated, which becomes more difficult for the heat, and humidity increases, and so on and so forth. So please be careful of your little ponies out there. If it's, even if you say that my arena's covered, and I'm in shade all day long, but the heat index, it's horrible out there. Have you experienced anything with or worked on or had anything to do with a horse that was under a heat stress, Mike?
Yes, I've seen horses that have gotten in trouble with heat stress. They can get their electrolytes out of balance. Most of the time, I'm working inside a barn, so we got some cover, and a lot of times we got fans, but not always. So it's a little easier than the horse out in the open, full sun and all that.
Now, do you see any heat when the horse has heat stress, do you see anything in their feet? Are you looking for anything in their feet as far as them suffering from a heat stress?
Well, any horse that's borderline on laminitic, which is a lot more out there that people think are borderline on metabolic, anything that overstresses their system can set off some traumatic events in feet.
So is it? I'm assuming it's harder to or more difficult to work on a horse that's stressed heat wise on their feet.
Well, hopefully not.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
All right, guys, well, stick around. Make sure you're taking care of your little ponies out there during this heat wave that we're going through. Now, we broadcast just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, a beautiful little town we like to call Marshville. So I'm just giving you the weather update on our side of the world. I'm sure your people over there in Australia and over there in France, some of our listeners over there might not be dealing with as much heat as we are here in the United States. So make sure you're paying attention to that heat index and also the humidity as well. And make sure you're looking at that as well, because that has a big effect on, what's the feel like temperature. You always see on the news. It's 80, but feels like 97 because it's 89% humidity out there, which just kills you. All right, guys, stick around. When we come back, we're going to get... All right, guys, stick around. When we come back, we're going to get Greg Coates, Farrier Extraordinaire, on the phone, and him and Mike have some history, so this should be interesting. Stick around. You're listening to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine. He'll be right back.
Good morning again.
Hey, we're not on the air yet. I just wanted to bring you on and let you know what we were just talking about. We were talking about the heat index on horses and dealing with horses' feet, and Mike was talking about, what were you talking about heat?
I was just rambling.
He was just making shit up is what he was doing.
Oh, that's what I'm going to do. So.
Yeah, there you go.
So much for that Emmy Award that we were going to win this year.
Right.
All right, so I'm gonna give me a sec. I gotta welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine. Sorry, I gotta say that again. Welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine, the official farrier of the 2018 World Equestrian Games. And don't forget, for every podcast we do, we have a matching video as well. Me waving to Mike, Mike waving to me. And make sure you go over to YouTube and like, subscribe, and follow, and do all that stuff that links us to you and you to us as well. And also, if you have any questions for Mike Stine, go over to equinedynamics.com. And the top of the page says contacts. Fill out that little form, and we'll read your question on the air. And make sure you put a return address on there. And if we read your question on the air, we'll send you out some magnets, some stickers, and all that stuff as well. And over to my far end side is Mike Stine. You doing all right?
I'm doing good, Travis.
Are you nice and cool over there? I got you a bottle of water.
I'm wonderful.
You look nice and cool.
I am cool.
I feel sorry for you because you're going to be working out in this heat here later on in the day. And on the phone with us right now, Farrier Extraordinaire, Greg Coates. How are you, Greg?
I'm doing really well. I was outside for a minute, and it's already too hot to be outside.
God, I'm telling you. Now, give me a little background. You and Mike have some history, and tell me how you got into the farrier business and how you and Mike and you, I forget the correct English pronunciation of that, how your paths have crossed.
I guess as farriers, they inevitably cross if you live sort of in proximity. And I started shoeing because my dad was a farrier, but I really didn't have any interest in it as a thing to do. I was learning to be a chef, but he got sick. So I moved home to help out for a summer thinking, sure, we're not from the restaurant. And I ended up really digging it after starting to help him. And that was 42 years ago. So here I am.
Jeez. Mike, how long you been shoeing horses? 42 years?
Well, no. Greg's been in it longer than I have. I went down a couple other routes first, like tree company, power lines, went to farrier school, and it got out of hand. Because when I went to farrier school, I was not going to do this for a living. And
so how did you and Greg's path cross?
Well, being in the same area and stumbling across each other, we started talking, and for some reason found interest in talking. And we've spent some time working together a little bit. And Greg won't say it, but Greg has worked like Carolina International and some FEI events himself.
So, Greg, you have done some big competitions and big events. Name off a couple, so we don't think we're just calling the kid down the road to be on the air.
Okay, I just got through. I do the War Horse Series at the Carolina Horse Park in Rayford. I live in Southern Pines. I do the War Horse Series for 6 months out of the year, every month. And then we also, my brother and I, who is also a farrier, we do the Carolina International. So, and that's a yearly thing. We do that every year.
Mike, what have you done lately?
Aggravated Greg.
Right? He comes to the International and hangs out.
Yeah, there you go.
Mike, as an aside, I saw Billy this weekend. He said hi.
Yeah. I spoke to Billy. He said he saw you.
Wait, I didn't.
Right.
I didn't speak to Billy. Who's Billy?
Billy Pope. He's another farrier that hangs out when we do things. So.
All right, Greg. Here's. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Greg, do you have any? Do you have any like funny stories about Mike? Because he's not one for talking over there.
Okay. Yes, I do.
Remember, it's a family show.
right. I'm editing as I speak. Okay, so he and I had this brilliant desire to boil a foot down and check out what it looks like on the inside, right? So we did that in a 55-gallon drum, and then it stayed there as a really disgusting stew for I don't even know how long.
Well, how did you
pour those?
Greg, how did you get the foot?
I don't remember. It was often a dead animal, though. It wasn't alive.
Right.
I don't remember. Mike, do you remember where the hell that came from?
I think those may have come from a limb dissection class where not everybody showed up.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right, so you got the foot in the barrel, in a 55-gallon barrel, and you're making this brew stew or something.
Yeah, right. We're going to boil it off because we think this is going to happen in an hour, right? You know, it's going to be easy. It was not. They're a lot tougher than they look, and it was disgusting, actually.
I think they got left in the barrel for about a year, and it all turned beautiful.
Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah. It was.
Have you seen those beetles that they use in like the in the museums and stuff when they get some kind of animal or creature? They put the bone with all the meat and stuff on it and the thing, and the beetles basically clean it off when it's completely done. You know, I think it takes a couple days or so. It's just like these, you know, brand new white bones and stuff. You should have done that with, you know, gone to the museum or see if they had some beetles laying around for you.
You know, we're too smart to think of things like that. We were going to boil it. That was just, you know, it's like, of course that'll work. So.
Well, sure. We're going to use fire.
Yeah.
Well, it works on chickens. If you're going to, you know, get the feathers off a chicken, you boil the chicken, pluck all the feathers, and then, you know, remove the meat, and you've got the wishbone at the end.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So you would think in theory it would work, and I understand it did not work. Well, that's too bad. So what did you end up doing with the leg, the foot? Did you bury it or anything?
I don't know. Like, it stayed in the barrel for so long. Mike disposed of it, I think.
Yeah, when I finally knocked a hole in the side of the barrel, because at this point it was full to the top of water, the bones that were in there were black. And
you couldn't bleach them or do anything like that to clean them up? Or
well, even though they'd been in there probably a year or so, and the years to guess, they were they didn't look that appetizing.
No, not like Dolly, right?
No, not like Dolly.
All right.
Oh my gosh, Dolly.
Yeah, that's right. Are you familiar with Dolly?
Greg's very familiar with Dolly.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. I didn't listen to, but I saw in an earlier version that you guys discussed Dolly, and of course that woke up all the memories. She was at the time. This is 20 years ago, probably.
9/11.
Mike. Yeah, exactly. She was on Mike's dining room table and just on display, right?
Yeah.
And she taught me a lot of stuff just standing and staring at her. Like, she was extremely club-footed, and you could see that from everything from the scapula down. You know, looking at her shoulders, it was amazing. It was very informative. I like Dolly.
Well, Mike takes her out to a clinic, and we just got done doing a Union County Ag Center clinic a couple of weeks ago, and he had Dolly out there, and it was very interesting. A lot of people came up and looked at it, and Mike had a whole bunch of slides and stuff. So that's part of Mike's clinic that he does. It's very informative. You can use it as a descriptive tool. She's excellent. Still performing her duties.
Yes, she is.
All right, guys, stick around. When we come back, we're going to talk about the pressure, releasing pressure in the deep digital flexor tendon. Stick around. You're listening to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine. He'll be right back. Ready, Mike?
Yes, sir.
You ready, Greg?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine. He was the 2017 American Eventing Championship Farrier. And for every podcast we do, we have a matching video. Make sure you go over to YouTube and check that out as well. And make sure you follow Mike Stine on Facebook. And the way you do that is search for Equine Dynamics Mike Stine. Mike, you've been posting a bunch of different videos, a bunch of tutorials and everything as far as horses. And what was the one horse where the line, he had his head curved to the right or something like that. You were trying to show the alignment of the spine.
Yeah. Horses are usually not near as straight as people think they are.
So if you want to see that tutorial over there, make sure you follow Mike Stine as well.
Which is one of the things you can learn from Dolly.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Make sure you follow Mike Stine over there at Facebook as well. And on the phone with, I'm sorry, hold on. Over to my far right side is Mike Stine, as he waves to me. And on the phone with us is Farrier Extraordinaire, Greg Coates. Greg, how are you?
I'm good. I'm starting to really like that title also.
It works for you.
You should get that sewn on a bumper sticker or something.
Right.
All right. So right now we're going to talk about what's involved with releasing pressure in a deep digital tendon. Deep digital flexor tendon altogether. First of all, what is a deep digital flexor tendon, and why are we releasing pressure from that, Mike?
Well, the deep digital flexor tendon comes down and it comes down the back of the leg. It attaches into the bottom of the coffin bone. And if you've got too low a palmar angle, too long a toe, it puts a lot of extra pressure on that, and that affects everything all the way up through the shoulder and the movement pattern of the horse. And also we got to deal with lameness issues because you've got the navicular bursa involved and, well, the joints all the way up the leg. And it also affects how, on the back end, there's some different effects, but if you're too tight and too straight, you don't get flexion in the back leg like you should.
Greg?
Yes. Wow. How long can we talk about this? Exactly what Mike just said. It affects so many things. Short term, it can do various things. Long term, it just starts destroying things. The navicular bursa being probably the biggest impact. So then, and it's all about levers, like Mike said, too much toe, too low a heel, all these things negatively impact.
So what's involved with releasing the pressure, and why would there be pressure in that position on the deep digital flexor tendon?
Wow. You have to draw a picture. Okay, so the deep digital flexor, DDFT, is coming down the back of the leg, the flexor side of the leg, the hind part of the leg, touching to the coffin bone, coming across the navicular bone and the navicular bursa associated. When you have too low of a heel, a negative palmar angle, as they call it now, you put excessive pressure on the navicular and the navicular bursa. So you then start doing things like, you can do it just through shoeing, just getting the breakover point back, not cutting all the heel off, or you can do it with wedge pads. Frog support helps sometimes. You kind of have to play with it with the horse in front of you.
Mike, is his solution the way you would approach to relieve the pressure in there?
There's a whole slew of different things to bring into the picture. Some of your horses, they're having navicular bursa problems. They may not like a frog support. If it's just collapsed and everything is pretty solid in the middle of the foot, the frog support can help quite a bit. So it's going to be very individual. And
go ahead, Greg.
No, I was just going to say it's exactly it. It's the horse in front of you. You just have to kind of play with solutions. The first thing you try might not be the right thing, but you got a lot of options.
Well, I got to say, I use, as far as like wedging, a lot less of that than I used to, and a lot more mechanics built in, because early on, you put a wedge pad on. But if you didn't, in that learning curve of trying to figure out how to shoe a horse, figuring out where the base of the foot was on its own and getting that centered up on the bone column can take a great amount of pressure off. And the other thing is, if you're wedging and you're not doing something about the mechanics on the front of the foot, you can create a crushing effect in the back of the foot.
Exactly. Centering up around the coffin bone and getting that, looking at the whole column of bones above the foot and working with that in mind is probably the preeminent thing to do. And I don't even carry wedge pads in my truck anymore. I pretty much can resolve things just through the placement of the shoe on the hoof.
So I always...
Not all the time.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, just not all the time, but for the most part, yes.
So I always ask, if this is left unkept or unmaintened or just left alone, what's the worst thing that could happen? I always ask that because I never, I've got a hangnail. Well, you need to, saw the fingernail down and do all this stuff, or just leave the hangnail be. Or, I've got a big gash in my leg. If I just leave it, what's going to happen? There's two different extremes. So I don't know how extreme is relieving the pressure or releasing the pressure as to something that's minute. So is this something, what happens if you do not take care of this or address this issue?
You can start collecting lawn ornaments.
Sorry. Yeah. It's, again, a really individual thing. There are horses that aren't doing much. They can stand on the worst shoeing in the world and be relatively comfortable because they're not being asked to do much. Then you start moving up the ladder as far as what their expectations are, all the way up to high-level competition animals. And that's where it starts becoming a matter of you need to get this right. It's a preventative measure as much as a corrective measure. So
in my mind, I'm thinking, like, for example, myself, I had plantar fasciitis at one time. And so that prevented me from doing any long distance walking or anything like that. But I could live with that. I could live with plantar fasciitis as long as I stretch my foot out and do all that things that, to accommodate that. Now, a baseball player would be completely different if he had plantar fasciitis. They would slice that muscle and relieve the pressure on that foot. Is that basically what you're saying as far as releasing the pressure from a deep digital flexor tendon?
That would be the most drastic thing to cut a tendon.
Yeah, that would be extremely drastic, and we don't want to go there on a performance horse if we wanted to be a performance horse.
Right. That would be a broodmare situation who's going to have babies and stand in a pasture for the most part. And she's really valuable. So, no cutting. You get into suspensories and associated attachment and support ligaments. Sometimes those you can cut, but it's actually fairly easy to work with because it's back to what Mike said. It's when you get that shoe centered up on the foot properly and get all the mechanics and motion working, you don't tend to have that kind of a problem. Genetics can definitely play a factor. You got horses that are just bred badly. Excuse me. But you can still work with that. It's going to limit their abilities, but yeah.
Yeah, bred badly, conformation, rider interference.
Right.
If you cannot get a horse to round up and carry itself, it's going to put a lot more down pressure on the lower structures.
All right, guys, well, stick around. When we come back, we'll talk about rocker shoes, not rocker arms, and how is it used to help horses. Stick around. You're listening to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine. He'll be right back. You okay, Greg?
Yeah, man, I'm good. How am I doing? Am I okay?
You're fine, man. Yeah,
you're great.
And jump in at any time. You can listen for the pause, and when someone's wrapping up a sentence, you can just jump right in. You too, Mike. Make sure you jump in as much as you can.
Okay.
I didn't do that much the other day with Kate, but Kate didn't really breathe in.
Yeah, she doesn't. Kate does not take a breath. She was just.
This is a little woman who writes for Across the Line Thoroughbred Racing. It's an online thoroughbred racing magazine.
Oh, okay.
And I don't think that I've ever really talked to you much since I've run into her around the first of the year. But she is cranked up and going wide open, and you can't slow it down.
Jesus. She's a pistol.
Well, I caffeinated.
Very caffeinated, extremely.
Yes, she's a pistol. All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine, the best podcast to create sounder horses from the ground up. Make sure you follow Mike Stine over there at the Facebook page, and the way you see that is Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine over on Facebook and YouTube as well. And, well, hi, Mike.
Hey, Travis.
He's already waving to me. He missed his cue. And for every podcast we do, we have a matching video as well. And you can see us here in the studio. Mike went ahead and waved to me, and I waved to Mike, and you can see us here in the studio.
We'd have Greg waving at us, but we can't see him.
Right. And don't forget, we had the heat index chart up there as well, so make sure you check that out over at the YouTube page as well. And maybe I can send that article to Mike, and he can post it on the Facebook page so you guys can look at that as well. Right, Mike?
Right.
All right. And on the phone with us right now as well, Greg Coates, a Farrier Extraordinaire. How are you, Greg?
I'm doing well.
Awesome. All right. So right now, how are rocker shoes used to help horses, Mike?
How are they used to help horses? Well, that's one of those things. It's pure mechanics. and it is used quite a lot with low palmar angle feet. And I kind of lean in that direction more nowadays than wedging.
Now,
it's not appropriate for everything. Nothing's appropriate for everything.
Now, my question is, are rocker shoes going to be affected with the new rule changes that they're doing with the traction bars or whatever on the shoes, or is this something totally different?
This is something totally different.
Okay, never mind then. Ignore me.
Run with it if you want to. We don't care.
All right, Greg, rocker shoes, big fan?
Not as much. I went down an interesting path about 30 years ago. Ran into a crazy, brilliant vet who gave me a lot of information, a lot of food for thought, and pushed me in a totally different direction from where I'd been. And okay, so that involved setting the brake over to a certain point, dividing the foot up into sections and getting the balance correct. So I did that, and I was it worked for me. It was a good thing. But in the South, we have pretty interesting bugs flying around in the springtime, and the animals hate them, and they stomp really hard. And I noticed that shoes were moving because animals were stomping. So I started trying some rocker shoes at that point. Just it would actually solidify the shoe on the foot a lot better. But the control I was trying to achieve with the breakover point set at a certain spot, I was losing that when I covered the toe with the rocker. I was still getting kind of an excessive toe growth there on some horses. I didn't go for a long time on that. So anyway, I went back to just setting the breakover, squaring the toe on the shoe, and have kind of stayed there with variations for 1994 or something.
Well, I think that you work with a lot of event horses.
Yeah.
And that, like we said, was not appropriate for everything. And on the eventers I'm shoeing, I'm really not going to a rocker. I do a fair amount of performance horses, but on the other end, I seem to have collected a whole lot of damaged horses, and that's where I'm bringing in the rockers more.
Right. To deviate a little bit, do you have many founder horses in your string?
At this point,
yeah,
a handful of them. Not like I used to. I used to do a boatload of them.
Right, and that's a mixed blessing kind of thing.
Right,
you never know if they're gonna die or not. Anyway, yes, and thinking about that, the foundered aspect, as far as using mechanical devices to help just relieve whatever's going on, mostly the sinking coffin bone, hopefully not sinking, but rotating. Yes, I would lean toward a rocker for that. I've used plywood shoes, weird things for foundered horses. But
now, when you say plywood shoes, is it literally like plywood shoes?
Yep. It was Dr. Stephen O'Grady, I think.
Yes, Stephen O'Grady, yes.
And he sent these down, and I would video conference with him to apply these shoes, and they were made out of plywood. And he would buff and shape, and it was to alleviate breakover in all directions and to support the heel. That was basically his design pattern for that. And you could do that best with stacked plywood on the horse.
Now, how long would that hold up? Because I would think, horses out in a pasture that doesn't drain well, plywood out there and swamp water is not going to work too well. How do they hold up?
Well, because of this situation, this horse did not do anything. He was extremely lame. This was a drug-induced founder, laminitis, and it was bad. So he was in his stall basically 24 hours a day. He couldn't move very well at all.
Yeah, these horses that are wearing like plywood clogs, whatever you want to call them, they're not going to be out and around and trying to go over jumps and doing 100 miles or anything like that.
So
when well padded stall.
When they get to that point, I mean, I don't want to say what's the use of putting anything on them and just keep their feet shaved down and not do any shoe or plywood shoe or anything like that. If they're that far, I don't want to say gone, but that's where I'm going is if they're that far gone, why put the effort, I guess? Not to sound cold and hearted, but
right.
This has a really philosophical kind of tone to it because people love their critters.
Yes.
It's like they don't want to see them in pain. They're going down any avenue they can to alleviate that pain. It leads in some really interesting directions. I'm usually willing to follow. I just really don't like working on a lot of laminated horses anymore because it's heartbreaking. You know, that horse ultimately died. And I kept telling the owner, you know, we can't ever say, yep, we got it. He's good. But I started thinking that, and then he died. So.
Right, exactly. And this is kind of a tough crapshoot some days because it is a roll of the dice. And you got to think about this, Travis. If your wife's mare was in trouble, what degree would she go to try to keep her okay?
I'd be broke. We'd have no house. We'd have no cars. Everything would be mortgaged 3 times over. You know, a Monopoly, when you land on Boardwalk and Park Place with like 4 hotels on it, you got to mortgage all your properties to pay that guy on Monopoly. That's what would happen with us if the horse was, everything would be mortgaged.
And if it was you, she'd just take you out back and have you put down, right?
She'd just leave me outside.
There you go.
Put me out the pasture and I'll just fend for myself. Naked and afraid.
Right, dig your own hole.
Exactly.
Yeah, here's a shovel. Go for it.
Anyway, so yes, that kind of decision drives a lot of stuff that we do. But getting back maybe a little more on track, what Mike and I probably primarily do is preventative stuff. People like to call it therapeutic or whatever. Mostly it's just decent shoeing. Just to, keep everything working as best you can on the horse in front of you, because you're going to see a lot of variables in conformation and use.
You got
that sort of thing.
Got to keep everything dialed in the ballpark.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Go ahead.
No, I didn't have anything.
No?
Go ahead.
All right, guys. We'll stick around. We got couple more segments, and then we'll let you get back to enjoying the rest of your day. You're listening to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine. He'll be right back. Greg, were you able to listen to that show or any of the shows that I sent you?
Yes, I did.
Okay,
I was.
Cool. Do you like them? No pressure.
Yeah, I did. No, I did. I had no expectations, and then I realized, well, I need to listen because.
Well, I try not to ever have any expectations. That way, I've learned.
We'll get my heart broken.
That's right.
Ready, Mike?
Yep.
Ready, Greg?
Yep.
Okay. Welcome back to Equine Dynamics. We'd like to hear from you, and the way you do that is go over to equinedynamics.com. Hold on, I got to start that over. I didn't like that. I don't like that intro. I forgot to say that.
That's a good thing about not doing it actually live.
I know. Well, it is somewhat live for the most part, but, recorded live in front of a studio audience type deal.
You got mice in here?
I do have mice in here.
Okay, those are audience.
Welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine. And we'd like to hear from you. And the way you do that is go over to equinedynamics.com. And at the top of the page, it says contacts. Fill out that little form. And if you have a question for us, we will answer it here on the air. And make sure you put a return address in there. We'll send you out some magnets, some stickers. We got some cool things to send out to you if we read your question on the air. And over to my far hand side is Mike Stine. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you, Travis?
Doing better. Doing better than this morning. It's nice and cool up here in the studio. It was getting a little hot, and I could look at the temperature thing right here. It already says 87 degrees outside. And on the phone with us right now as well is Farrier Extraordinaire Greg Coates. How are you?
I'm doing well.
All right, so right now we're going to talk about tips for working with a one-sided horse. And first of all, define what a one-sided horse is, Mike.
Most of them.
All horses are one-sided.
Yeah. Horses are born when they're in the womb. They're not straight. They're laying in the belly.
Right.
And they've got a bend to them.
Now, do they lay like we do as in a fetal position, or they lay something totally different?
Well, it's a fetal position for a horse.
But so I'm imagining all 4 legs curled up like they're squatting down, laying in the pasture type deal. Is that
yes?
That's what they look like.
And there is some right-handed, left-handed, and there's 2 horses. And then you throw a rider that sits heavy to one side on a horse over a long period of time. You get uneven development. You got an injury. They got 4 legs to hide it on, so they can hide an injury for a long time, and over time you become more developed on one side, less on the other. And for us to use these horses long-term sound performance horses, for Greg to get them through the Carolina or whatever it may be, the straighter and more even a horse is, the better they'll perform. So
when you say one-sided horse, in my mind, I'm a right-handed person. I throw a baseball with my right hand. I kick, a softball or softball.
You kick a softball with your right hand.
Well, I mean, kick like a kickball with my right foot. So I'm right-handed, right foot. Is that primarily what a one-sided horse? It favors one side of the, a left-sided horse or a right-sided horse. Is that right? Am I saying? All right.
Yeah, that would kind of be it. And if you notice, most horses will kind of tend to turn one way easier than the other.
Right. Kind of. Yeah.
Or they'll lean in on a turn one way and they'll counterbend the other way.
Greg, what's your experience with working with one-sided horses?
Everything Mike just said, but the one thing I'll throw in there to the mix is it's interesting because when you say one-sided and you talk about a person, it's usually right hand, right foot. With the horse, it tends to be more of a diagonal, right front, left hind kind of thing. But they'll start, they'll prefer, they'll move around on a certain lead on their own out in the pasture. If you see them pick up a canter or a gallop, they'll take the right lead, for instance, more often. And then you exacerbate that with a rider who is predominantly right-handed. A buddy of both Mike's and mine, Greg Wilder, he does, I have no idea really how to describe it. He does deep fascia release on horses. We used to. He's now not doing that anymore. But he could tell a lot about the rider just by working on the horse as far as one-sided behavior. And exacerbates that or alleviates it, kind of depending on the rider too.
So what are some? What are some of the tips that you have, Greg, for working with a one-sided horse?
I can't really say those out loud.
You can say it, and I'll determine whether I need to cut it out or not.
Well, with my rapport with most of my riders is pretty blunt, so I will. It's not really an issue. I don't have people going, this horse only, I can't get him to pick up a lead to the left. It's like, well, that's a you thing. That's not a me thing. It's like, right. You need to get your shit right.
Well, the caliber of rider you're working with definitely makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not a thing that comes up as a general rule in my discussions with, what's going on with this horse and how do we do things with him to help. So that's basically what I do.
Well, the biggest place that comes up for me is on these, I've always collected the oddball things. And right. You got a horse that has a certain amount of damage. They've been protecting it for years. And all of a sudden, we want to take him back and we want to make him into a performance horse.
Right. Yes.
And there you go. And sometimes some of these horses cannot be shod exactly the same because they don't work the same from left to right.
Right.
And people want to, then you people, I want everything to match. Well, the horse doesn't match. So you want us to get the horse where it can go in a straight line and not constantly circle. Right.
Exactly.
Mommy, why do I keep walking around in circles? Shut up or I'll nail your other foot to the floor.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Mike was talking about how they lie in the fetal position in utero affects a lot of what they're doing when they're young, but then they're also very rubbery when they're born. Everything is flexible. Their bones are flexible.
But they're so cute. When they come right out and they stand up and they're little wiggly wobbly legs, you're just like, oh, look at that. There's a there's a farm about a couple miles up the road that do what's the horse-drawn carts.
Standardbreds.
Yep, and they breed them over there. And just about every other week, there's a little baby out there, and I got to slow down so Amy, my wife, can sit there and go, oh, look at all the new babies, and they're all out there, and they're all nice and shiny coats and stuff.
Right, and they look like little grasshoppers or dandelion or something. They're adorable. And
yes.
But then you start looking at them with like Mike's or my eyes, and you can see, this is going to be a little bit club-footed. Of course, they look club-footed when they're first born anyway, because they're just so upright.
Well, they get in, when they're young and before their neck has grown long enough, some of them will get into that odd grazing pattern where they're always back on one side, and some of that's developmental during those early years. Right, and we have a chance to do something with it in the early years, but if you wait too long, we're competing with that the rest of that animal's life.
Now, when you say you're doing something for a one-sided horse, what are you actually doing for a one-sided horse? I mean, what are the logistics of it? Are you making shoes higher, lower, thicker, wider?
At times, and I'll spend some time with Tony Gonzalez. He was really into the one-sided horse, and that's where Dolly came from. And the longer I've messed with it, as far as padding them and all that sort of thing, the further I've gotten away from it. But learning And, early on when I met Greg, he was pointing at what I was doing and laughing at me, and for good reason. But it's like, yeah, is that how you do that, really? And, but the more fine-tuned and the better I've learned to deal with pressures in the foot. It's like, okay, somebody that always kicks one toe out, they'll always drop a hip. If I can, and you get some odd pressures in a foot, hoof shearing and all that, the better I can get that to settle down and get that limb to rotate in. When we're talking about hind legs, and that hip socket is kind of a loose ball socket, so they can rotate in and rotate out. And if I've got a pressure problem in the foot, it can rotate it out. And if they do, they tend to drop that hip.
Greg, what are you doing?
I'm making coffee.
Oh, well, cut it out.
Okay.
And I find it the same with front feet also. The more fine-tuned I can get, and let's normalize the pressure from side to side, medial, lateral, diagonally, whatever it is in the foot where we've got an odd pressure. If you got to push up somewhere, you got to pull somewhere else and take care of those pressure points. The better I can get them to start squaring up without putting applications on them. And the better I can have gotten with getting the mechanics in the shoe and that breakover back and the foot under the foundation and bone column, most of them can be taken care of there. The odd one out, you have to go a little further with.
Greg, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Only that there's so much intense connective tissue up high on the hind end of a horse that you can totally move a leg around with shoeing mechanics. But it takes a long time for that to kind of settle in up higher, up the limbs, up into the hips. And sometimes you can do that and it's effective and it'll hold. But sometimes it isn't. And again, it comes back into a lot of factors. Who's riding the horse? What are they doing with the horse?
Are they
that sort of thing?
Are they one-sided?
The rider.
Exactly.
The rider, yes.
Yeah.
Because that drives it real hard, heavy with one hand. If they're and most riders are going to be more heavy right-handed, but if you stop that right shoulder, it's going to stop that left hand when they're trotting.
All right, guys. Stick around. When we come back, we got one more little segment, and we'll let you get back to enjoy your coffee, Greg. You're listening to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine. Stick around. We'll be right back. Yeah, Greg, you'd be surprised how sensitive the phone is, and then when you go through a mixing board and stuff like that, even like your footsteps in the kitchen, I can hear the footsteps in the kitchen.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
so I've been scolded many times.
Okay.
No worries. I'm not mad at you or anything. I just think it's funny. Because Mike's talking, I hear like blue, 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 blue. I'm like, what is going on in the background? Is he smoking a bong or something? What's going on? This show's so good, man.
This is like deep, man.
Yeah, totally. Whoa. Welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stine, the best podcast to create sounder horses from the ground up. Make sure you get your questions into Mike Stine. The way you do that is go to equinedynamics.com. At the top of the page says contacts. Fill out that little form there with your question. Make sure you put a return address so we can send you out some magnets, some stickers for reading your question on the air. And don't forget, for every podcast we do, we have a matching video as well. Me waving to Mike, Mike waving to me. And we just recently posted a bunch of different videos about Ray Morris and Ray Morris massaging styles. Give a little background on those videos that are up on your YouTube page, Mike Stine.
That is an educational video that Ray had done for horse owners. He taught a lot of horse owners to massage, and he was teaching massage in New Zealand and Australia. Primarily up here, he was teaching horse owners. He was also a saddle fitter, and Ray was totally blind. And he I was his own way of doing things.
I read his story. He had diabetes at the age of 3, and then later on in life, he lost his sight completely in 1980, and then in 2009, he had a kidney transplant due to the illness that he had, and then unfortunately passed away in 2009, May of 2009.
Like 5 weeks after the transplant, had a massive heart attack. And
one of the things that he was saying in his bio that I was reading is him being blind actually increased his knowledge as far as the way he, quote unquote, looked at a horse. He basically had to touch the horse, and touching the horse is a little bit more than actually seeing the horse. Sometimes your eyes can be deceiving, but your touch is more true than anything.
That's very true. He can lay his hand on the shoulder and tell you whether it had a long, low heel or a club foot just by the way the shoulder felt.
That's amazing.
And I learned a lot from Ray. We ended up doing clinics together, and Greg spent a little time around Ray.
And don't forget, on the phone with us right now is Greg Coates as well, Farrier Extraordinaire and mega coffee drinker. Greg, how are you?
I'm doing well.
So were you able to meet Ray Morris at all, or are you aware of his practices that he did?
Yes. Mostly through Mike, but yeah, I was in that sphere for a moment. And I'm thinking about how, like Mike has said, you can get a certain visual bias when you look at things and you kind of expect it to be whatever, or not see things without, really examining. When you walk up and put hands on a horse, that's a lot of information. That's a lot of information. And he refines that to an extreme degree.
Well, it's like you were talking about Mr. Wilder down there and what he could tell you by laying his hands on the horse. You probably spent a lot more time around Greg Wilder than I did, which I did spend a little time around Greg. And then I spent most of my body work time with Mr. Ray Morris.
Right.
But it's all coming into the same direction.
Right. It's information. You can do different things with it, but it's input.
So here's the information that I want. Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot now. Mike, do you have any stories about Greg, since he told you the whole you boiling a horse hoof? Do you have any stories about Greg?
Something I can tell on air?
Well, yes, it is a family show.
Oh, well.
Oh, darn.
You can save it for next week.
One thing that I've told people, one of the very first times, I knew who Greg was. And one of the very first times we really met was very early on in my career. And the shoeing school that I went to was, well, sketchy. But it got me a start. And one of Greg's clients had called because Greg was out being Greg and asked me if I could come shoe a horse. And Greg comes pulling in there. And I'm over there trying to draw a clip, which was at that point not good at all. So Greg hung out and we talked, and I guess that's where we really first started talking. And I was like, really? That's how you do it? But he got me through shoeing his client's horse and left me with his client.
So there you go. Left him in the weeds.
No, and from there on we started talking, and we were beating on metal together and all that kind of stuff, and kind of pushed each other along. Greg started off, I don't think he had any choice but to be a farrier. And Jerry had a lot of talent and a lot of knowledge. And one thing that always sticks in my head, one of the discussions we had about horses, is you told me that something that had come from Jerry about it's a lot easier for people to understand how that front leg works because it works sort of like our leg, but it's hard for people to figure out that chicken leg on the back end of that horse.
Right. It's still kind of a mystery to me sometimes. I'll just stare and, let my brain wander to try to figure out a hind end.
All right, guys, what did we learn today? What's involved with releasing pressure on a deep digital flexor tendon, Mike?
A whole lot. Basically, for most horses and our performance horses, is get your foundation right. That starts with your trim and then your shoe placement, mechanics you build into your shoe.
Greg?
Yes, that, and keep an open dialogue with your riders too. If you're doing performance horses, anybody actually.
Right.
Education is always good. Information is always good. So yeah, that line of communication is also a good thing to maintain.
How are rocker shoes used to help horses, Mike?
Well, that's one of those deals. Used correctly, it can unload a lot of pressure off the flexor tendon. Now understand, if you take pressure off the flexor tendon, it has to go somewhere. It doesn't magically vanish. And it's more of a therapeutic application than you would use on like your upper end event horses or anything like that.
Greg? Since you don't like rocker shoes.
I'm not the biggest fan of them. But part of that's because I'm lazy. I just don't like to get fired that much, especially when it's hot. But I've also been able to achieve basically the same function with just setting the brake over back than squaring its toe a little bit. But again, never say never. I would absolutely use a rocker shoe in certain applications. So, yeah, they have their uses.
Tips for working with a one-sided horse, Mike?
Well, there again, riders involved, the whole package is involved. nailing down the foundation as good as we can. And, one thing that, like Greg says, talk to your riders, talk to your trainers. I've got some out there that are very good that will lay out information. It's like boom, 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 right down the line. I get told a lot of things where I better step back and look at the horse. And he was talking about, the time we both spent with body workers and learning, okay, they're telling me something, but then I look at the horse and the horse is telling me something different. And years of experience dealing with this, learning to pick up on what the horse is telling us.
Greg?
Exactly that. If it gets to the point where you're actually having to deal with a one-sided issue, it's becoming problematic for the package, the rider and the horse. You're going to get more people involved. You're going to need to get a body worker, or a massage worker, somebody in. You're probably going to change possibly the shoeing up a little bit to deal with that, but it's going to be an all hands on deck kind of thing to deal with that when it becomes problematic. For the most part, it's more annoying than problematic. Somebody's like, oh yeah, he'll pick up the right lead. Hard to turn to the left, but we deal with it.
None of them are dead even. It's just at what point. Of course, I've always been one, like with the laminated course and everything else. If it's across the line, I'm gonna go over there and do it.
Yeah,
just to see if I can figure it out. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
Well, we'd like to thank each and every one of you for listening to us, downloading us, and making us part of your day. We're going to let you get back to enjoying the rest of your day. On behalf of Mike Stine over there, and Greg,
good one.
And Greg Coates on the phone.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. I had a good time. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. My name is Travis Holmes, saying see you next week.
All of the doggies are in the corral. All of your work is done. Just close your eyes and dream, little pal. Dream of someone.
Hi, Lucky. Good night, Ned. Night, Dusty.
Good night, Ned.
Good night, Ned.
And we're clear.
So what you think?
Man, that was fun. Although I am walking around the house looking like somebody's off their meds right now because I've got earphones in, but and all my people and animals are looking at me funny. But
Well, they may look at you funny all the time. You're just paying attention now.
Right, I'm just not usually seeing it. Right.
Yeah.
But no, that was good. I enjoyed that.